Believe it or not, there is a new narco highway, a new route and way to traffic kilos of drugs. This is the first time that I'm really hearing about this in a big way, to be completely honest, and it's really messed up.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with yours truly, Katarina Schultz. I read a report that really caught my attention, and that is that livestock ships filled with dying and diseased cattle with months worth of feces and rotting carcasses are being used to smuggle drugs. This is really messed up. I mean, I see a lot of horrible things, and sometimes I get comments from you guys being like, hey, Katarina, you should check this out. I think it's really messed up. I know you've seen a lot of things, but this, like with animals and stuff like that, it's just really unideal. This is also really hard to tackle if we're looking at this from like the law enforcement perspective. And that's because the smell is so bad that authorities do not want to inspect these vessels, and canine units can't get past the stench to sniff out the drugs. Despite Europe's intense maritime surveillance, okay, we're talking about a region that highly differs from when we're talking about fentanyl and cocaine smuggling and precursor smuggling into places like Canada or Mexican ports. Now, Europe has an intense maritime surveillance, but only one cattle ship has been seized carrying cocaine in almost 20 years. And it's unclear as to whether this is because this isn't actually a new regular method or like a common method, or if it's due to the lack of oversight because authorities are kind of turning the other way from this because it's not desirable. I mean, I think generally sometimes the way drugs are hidden, it's done so in a way so that authorities are disincentivized from checking it out. But I really think this takes the cake. Now, in some of the reporting that I've seen on this, authorities allegedly privately admitted to not wanting to board these vessels because conditions are, and I quote, unbearable. Okay, well, when we're talking about a bunch of dead cattle that's been in transportation for a long period of time, it's gonna get gross. If any of you have ever been on a farm or lived on a farm or a ranch, whatever, you know that this isn't ideal. I keep saying that. I think that's a bit of an understatement. I've said that in episodes before where I will call something not ideal or not state of the art, and people are like, Katarina, be for real. So these livestock carriers have essentially, or are becoming, I think we're likely going to see more of this, because as soon as we see something like this happen, it typically means this is the tip of the iceberg. And it could be that livestock carriers are becoming the cartel's perfect floating blind spot, or any transnational organized crime group or mafia. So the ships used are typically 200-meter long rusting livestock carriers capable of transporting around 7,000 to 10,000 cattle. That's a lot of cows, okay? And think of the conditions, especially if they're dying, especially if there's feces everywhere. I hate saying that. I don't know. This is this story is a little bit out of my realm. When we're talking about, and you guys have seen, when I'm around tragically rotting dead bodies, it's horrible, but when we're talking about hundreds or perhaps even thousands of rotting carcasses, yeah. All right. So these routes where the cattle vessels are being used to smuggle mostly cocaine are typically starting in Brazil and Colombia and making their way to Lebanon, so Beirut, Egypt, and both of these places, this region typically just has a far less strict livestock sanitation regulations than in Europe. And so if there is a crackdown on these livestock carriers, we'll likely have to look at the regions that have more lenient rules in terms of this transportation, because this is how it's getting through. So, according to intelligence reports, at least one suspicious livestock ship departs weekly from South America, and these vessels often collect 4 to 10 tons of cocaine per journey. That is estimated from law enforcement as around 450 million euros. I just want everyone to keep in mind, and I try to make this clear every time I'm talking about law enforcement estimating the value of a drug shipment, it's typically inflated. I have a whole story about this on my Substack about how we have to keep in mind the street value or the bulk purchasing value of cocaine in particular, because law enforcement loves to just nearly triple that number sometimes. However, 4 to 10 tons of cocaine per journey, and you've got, let's say, once a week, it's still significant. Maybe not, 450 million significant, but it's up there. Let's get into the key here. Why is livestock the perfect cover for smuggling? Because what have we seen before? And I've done plenty of reporting on smuggling routes and methods, and typically we're talking about passenger vehicles, Cessna, so light aircrafts, rigs, big truckers, marine vessels, amongst agriculture, oil, like really any food, any type of shipments. Livestock changes the game, okay? It may be disgusting, but it's effective. I'm not saying the animals are disgusting. I'm just saying, when I describe to you, this is what police how they describe the conditions on board: festering, rotting, and toxic. Okay? The description from the raids were that there were months of compacted feces on the vessel, hundreds of dead animals left where they fell, pools of urine, and ammonia-thick fumes. Some officers said that you can't stay on deck more than a few minutes without getting sick or gagging. I know that this would just send me into orbit because I've never probably talked about this before because there was no need, but one thing, smells, okay, guys? And you guys have seen me in some pretty hairy situations where I'm sure you could assume that the smells are not ideal. And I've become really good. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but side note, I've become really good at just breathing through my mouth and not taking in the smell. But as soon as I get a whiff, and if someone starts puking around me, it's game over. It's game over for me. There's no way. So in order to fully and properly inspect these vessels, police would need, first of all, a port willing to receive the ship, veterinarians to attend to the cattle, whether they're dying, alive, or even dead, and environmental officers, because this is literally a biohazard. So they would also need biohazard teams, and then cranes and pens for the thousands of alive and dead livestock. do you call dead animals livestock? I think that seems not right, but I'm not a farmer.
If you're looking for a recovery shake that actually does its job, check out Formula One from First Form. It's a rapid digesting whey protein isolate made for post-workout recovery. That means that it gets into your system fast to help the muscles repair and cut down soreness. It mixes ultra smooth, it's easy on your stomach, and it tastes legit. All the flavors are good, but for me, Cinnamon Toast Crunch is hands down the best one. Plus, it's NSF certified for sport and Informed Choice certified, so you know it's clean. First Form is giving free shipping on orders over $100, and if you don't love it, they'll give you your full refund. Hit the link in the description and grab Cinnamon Toast Crunch Formula One today. I want to thank our partners over at Ammo Squared. They've built what they call America's Ammunition Reserve, basically an ammo savings account. You sign up, pick from more than 70 calibers, set your auto buy budget, and either choose a shipping schedule or just let your reserve grow. Over time, your ammo stacks up and is stored for free in a climate-controlled facility in Texas or Idaho until you're ready to ship. No minimums, no extra fees. It works whether you got a small budget or just don't want to drop a few grand at once. Thank you so much, Ammo Square, for providing such a cool service and supporting the show.
Authorities are calling this method that they've uncovered a logistical nightmare. And it certainly is, which is why organized crime groups have probably looked at this as a very effective method. Okay, if police need tons of resources and different teams that are outside of policing in order to combat this, they know it takes longer. It takes more paperwork, time, resources, people. With that being said, this is the perfect way to get a bunch of shipments through under the radar and evading any detection. And also, let's be realistic. And you guys know, when law enforcement does what they're doing, great, right? I come from this sort of unbiased perspective. But I think that when we look at the big picture of law enforcement combating smuggling, when the operation is more complex, it takes longer. The incentive for getting that crackdown is there, and being able to take credit for this big bust is definitely there. But I think the incentive for actually having to go in and do the work, sometimes it's like, and even in speaking with law enforcement, they're just like, man, this is a lot. This would be a lot. This is also going to be very costly because of the amount of teams necessary, whether we're talking about the vets, the cranes, the cops, the biohazard teams, and then just generally being able to identify that these cattle carriers actually have drugs on it. So doing all of that work and maneuvering between dead and alive cattle and fecal matter and urine and whatever is on that carrier, and then at the end, oh, there's no drugs. So that's costly, that takes time, and it's unclear if this is even such a high-level major method at this point that it's even worth those resources. And I'm kind of trying to think of that from like the perspective that law enforcement would be thinking of it. One key thing is sniffer dogs, canine units kind of fail here, which is obviously makes things more complicated because these dogs become essentially useless because the overwhelming stench of cattle overwhelms any sense that could lead the canines to detection. Not to mention, because of how strong and putrid the scent is, some of the dogs become sick. They will refuse to work. They can't work past it. You need, human manpower for this, which involves physically going through what's on these carriers. Sure, there could be a bunch of cocaine, but I mean, I've spoken to some law enforcement officers before who say, I'm not speaking for everyone, okay? I just want to keep that clear. but they'll be like, you know, we could be checking this and we could be checking that, but at the end of the day, we're focused on certain busts and not smaller amounts coming in. And that's something that we're also kind of seeing shift in a way with the Trump administration, where they're kind of making it seem like they are trying to target the smaller guy. You know, they're going up the totem pole as opposed to just like kingpin strategy over and over again. And so I think in practice that is effective, but because that hasn't been the practice for so long and it's basically just been about like get the big bust and get the head honcho, that this is kind of an overhaul of the way that like drug enforcement has worked in the history of time. In terms of the way the smuggling methods work, so first it's loading the cargo, right? Cocaine is hidden at origin in like grain silos, feed compartments, or false structures. We've seen this before. There's like a fake wall or some sort of item or structure that looks necessary, but it's really just like a shell to hide drugs. And then that will be inserted while loading cattle in cartel-controlled ports. We know there's a lot of those globally. And then there's the mid-ocean retrieval and drop-off. So at sea, crews will retrieve the packages, tie them to inflatables, attach GPS trackers, and throw them overboard. And then fast boats pick up the bundles, which are en route to Europe, typically Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, a lot of these major hubs that then distribute the drugs throughout the European network. I guess a good example, because I know most of the viewers are American, would be the way a lot of drugs are trafficked directly to Southern California, New York, Chicago, and then from these hubs in Texas are distributed throughout American networks. So these are kind of the key countries and key major cities. These ports are literally Europe's major cocaine entry ports and have been since almost the beginning of time here. So then we have this shadow delivery route, which is allowing, kind of permitting these drop-offs to happen in the first place, because you have the official manifest, which is the livestock is going to Lebanon and Egypt, which is a region where, like I said, the actual regulations around cattle transportation are pretty lenient. But this unofficial cargo that's on board is cocaine that's being sent to Northern Europe and then throughout Europe. The livestock portion of the journey is giving this cover for long maritime routes. Now, in January, there have been a few times police intervened. I'm going to kind of walk you through it, all right? You have in January of 2023, the Orion V seizure. Spanish police intercepted on a 100-meter cattle ship 62 nautical miles southwest of the Canary Islands, Spain. They found 4,500 kilos of cocaine. They valued it at 82 million euros. Again, take that with a grain of salt. It was hidden in the cattle feed silos, and there were 1,700, actually almost 1,800 cows on board. Officers, again, during this seizure, waded through feces and urine to locate the drugs. The ship was towed to Las Palmas de Gran Canaria? Yeah, I think so. I've actually been to Spain, but I have not been to the Canary Islands. 28 crew members were arrested. And apparently, locals in that area complained about the smell of the vessel for days. I'm just trying to put this into perspective for you guys, because why? You guys are, I know I'm going to get comments of people being like, Katarina, we get it, it stinks, shut up. The reason why is because this is literally the key to this operation being successful, point blank, okay? Then in Australia last year, you had the Al Kuwait seizure, a livestock ship carrying sheep accidentally, quote unquote, for those of you just listening, dropped a floating drum of cocaine near Lancelin, and it was valued at 84 million euros. Authorities found a blue drum and ropes aboard resembling the floating stash. Why does this method work, and why do I think that this is going to be a growing method using the cattle? Which, like, honestly, it's so sad because cows are very nice animals. Like, I know I love milk and I eat the meat, so I guess I'm one to talk, but the extreme conditions, like I said, are discouraging for law enforcement. Like it or not, it's just the case. Maritime police, customs, and environmental authorities are just reluctant to board these vessels and have to sift through all the literal shit on board in order to perhaps track down that there might be cocaine or that this vessel might have been used to drop cocaine in the middle of the ocean. The vessels smell so foul that ports even refuse to accept them unless they are legally bound to. And that's why this is perfect. You're taking this shadow route, you drop the drugs, the port doesn't even want you, back you go to Colombia with a bunch of dead and rotting cows. It's really the perfect disguise because livestock carriers operate in just poor regulatory environments. We know that ports generally have a sort of weak regulations around them. And then when we're throwing in that this is cattle shipments in the mix, even better for the cartels and organized crime groups. Crews are typically easily bribed, so are longshoremen, and these ownership structures are pretty opaque, to be honest. Then there's also these long and slow meandering routes that make them ideal for mid-sea exchanges. You're really, when we're talking about transnational, global organized crime, this right here is the creme de la creme. This is a reliable and low-risk smuggling operation. It's ideal, and it's highly profitable because they're using Lebanon and Egypt as shadows. It's going straight from Colombia, and the drugs are ending up right in Europe, where the rate of return for what you just spent on this smuggling operation to the money that's going to come, like just how lucrative it's going to be selling cocaine in Europe. Come on, people. I'm going to start really locking in on the narco Europe pipeline here in my reporting. Stay tuned for that because for real, it's not a joke, all right? When we're talking about the wider context and this global boom in maritime cocaine trafficking, Europe is literally experiencing record-breaking cocaine imports. This is driven by overproduction in Colombia, the competition between the cartels, the Rotterdam-Antwerp corridor, and this livestock ship and transportation join with other innovations for smuggling, like the banana containers, fishing boats, narco subs, sailboats, and yachts. And those are all smuggling, what do you call that? Like smuggling maneuvers, smuggling pipelines that police have completely on their radar. So these livestock ships are completely unique because nobody's really checking them. Nobody wants to. I decided to reach out to some law enforcement that I thought could maybe speak to me. So this was someone who obviously did not want to be put on blast on the podcast, but they're based in Portugal, and this person essentially told me they work in this sort of narcotics intelligence and particularly on maritime trafficking. Basically told me, you cannot imagine the smell And authorities don't want these vessels anywhere near their ports, and said that these mafias know exactly what to take advantage of and what they're doing. And a big problem here with combating this is that there's a worry around contamination and disease, and then the overwhelming logistics and having the proper biohazard teams come in. This is kind of trying to tackle, like I said, a logistic nightmare, a beast of logistics, to sure crack down on a perhaps significant shipment of cocaine, but at the same time, and this individual said to me, making sure all those resources are in place for this to be done properly and timely is complicated, point blank. I know that animal welfare groups are likely going to get involved in this, and it'll probably be overseas groups then looking at Colombia and the South American countries where this livestock is starting off at. There's also some groups that I found, particularly in Brazil, who are close to ports or where it seems like these livestock vessels are taking off. And in these community groups, they are complaining about a smell, which means this, whatever is happening and whatever disease and terrible conditions is happening to those animals on the transportation is starting at the point of origin. And I almost wonder if and assume that this is being done purposely, letting some animals already die and relieve themselves on these vessels before they even start the journey, so that by the time they get to the destination, the shadow port, it's so putrid that the port rejects them. Or if they are stopped by law enforcement along the way or at the destination, there is completely no desire for any of these guys to board and check the vessel out. It's important to keep in mind, and I think like some key takeaways here, I say this every time, but this is a textbook example of what I mean when I say cartels and these major organized crime groups who are so heavily profiting off of drug smuggling will adapt and find any means necessary to get their drugs transported globally to make money, because it's a lot of money, okay? This isn't like you're maybe getting $60,000. No, you may be getting actually $60,000 in 2 minutes. This is exorbitant monetary value. And so they always find a way to adapt. And this is one of them. And this is one of them where I'm sure, I was pretty taken aback when I read all the reports around this and spoke to law enforcement, because this is one of those things where it's like, damn, you really don't stop at anything. And it's obviously proving to be effective. So I'm curious to see where this goes, if there is going to be a broader crackdown on these livestock carriers, these livestock maritime carriers, and if generally this really is a major means of smuggling drugs into Europe. But this kind of seems like we're at the tip of the iceberg, and between the fear, the cost, and the logistics, it may take some time before we even find out if this really is as big of an issue as it could become. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with yours truly, Katarina Schultz. As always, see you next time.
They were ghosts. Who are these guys?
I've never heard this before.
Right behind me, we have armed police. They're ready for sort of riot patrol.
I'm Sean Ryan. and I'm hosting the new Ironclad original, Target Intelligence PSYOP.
We're not framing history correctly.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
It's an Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Ironclad original.
Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.